My family and I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and the children played freely in the streets without a care in the world. We had lived there for 5 years, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. That was until the new family moved in next door. From the moment they arrived, there was something unsettling about them. They kept to themselves, never interacting with their neighbors. Their house was always dark, and the curtains were always drawn. The only time we ever saw them was when they would leave for work in the morning and return in the evening. My parents tried to be friendly, but the new neighbors would always give a curt nod and quickly retreat into their home. The children, especially, were afraid of them. They would whisper about them behind their hands and avoid walking past their house. One night, I was awakened by a loud noise. It sounded like something was being thrown against my window. I got out of bed and cautiously looked out. In the darkness, I could see a figure standing in my neighbor's yard. The figure was holding something in its hand, and it was repeatedly raising it and throwing it towards my window. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to wake my parents, but I also didn't want to stay in my room and wait for the figure to break in. I decided to hide in my closet. I huddled in a corner of the closet, listening to the noise outside. The figure kept throwing things at my window, but it never tried to break in. After what seemed like hours, the noise finally stopped. I waited for a few more minutes before cautiously creeping out of my closet. I went to my parents' room and told them what had happened. They were shocked and scared. They immediately called the police, who came and searched the neighborhood. They found nothing, but they promised to patrol the area extra closely. The next day, I was walking home from school when I saw the figure from the night before standing in my neighbor's yard. It was staring at me with a cold, expressionless gaze. I was so scared that I ran the rest of the way home. I told my parents what I had seen, and they decided that we needed to move. We couldn't live in fear like that anymore. The next week, we put our house up for sale and moved to a new neighborhood. I never found out who the figure was or what it wanted from me. But I will never forget the fear and terror I felt that night. It was a night that changed my life forever. Growing up, I lived in a not-so-big town, the biggest one in our state, but kinda rough. It had lots of fights and bad stuff happening. Our home was right next to this bar that always got shut down because of the noise and fights. But it kept reopening with a new name. Our place was in a trailer park, near that bar. Some people warned me about the folks living there, and said I should stay away. I had a few neighbors like that, but the ones I really liked were the single mom and her 2 girls. They were younger than me, and we became buddies after some people got kicked out by our kinda weird landlady a few years back. Then, this new guy moved in. He was alone, but he'd hang out with these older dudes. They were older than me, but younger than my parents, always hanging around and acting loud when they were drinking. Things got strange when he showed up. First off, my stepdad, who wasn't a good person, decided to build a tall fence between our trailers. He didn't want that new guy on our property. He'd say some mean stuff while we built it, but the new guy just stayed nice and waved at us whenever we came home. It made me feel weird, like I owed him something for not fighting back against my stepdad's mean words and that weird fence. But then things got worse. Every time I went to the mailbox, the new guy and his friends would gather outside. He'd say hi, but the others just stared and laughed. It made me feel uneasy, like they were laughing at me for being scared. Over time, I got better at saying hi, but they kept laughing, making me feel more and more uncomfortable. Then one day, the new guy started walking with me to get the mail, asking about my day and school stuff. I didn't like it, it made me feel nervous, but I didn't trust my feelings back then. He never checked his mailbox when we went together, which was weird. Later on, he said something weird about my legs and it made me feel awful. I tried telling my mom, but she thought I was just being silly. Even my stepdad didn't take it seriously. It felt like nobody understood how scared I was. After that, he started waiting for me after school, blocking my way and talking, just like when we walked to the mailbox. It happened every day. I felt trapped. Then a girl from my class offered to walk with me, and when she found out about the new guy, she thought he was creepy too. We made a plan for her to walk me home, and then I'd watch her until she got out of sight. After that, the guy stopped waiting for us. Now, my friend and I talk about what that guy's intentions were, but we're not really sure. It's still kinda scary to think about. But this story happened when I was 15 years old. One night, I was at my friend Sarah's house. Her house was in a rough neighborhood near our high school. Sarah's dad was a single parent and he was working late, so it was just the two of us. But her dad had stocked the house with junk food and let us watch whatever we wanted on demand since it was still daytime. We decided to take a walk down to the pond and park a few blocks away. On our way back, when we were only a house or two away, a car pulled up behind us. I didn't know who it was, but Sarah did. She said it was her neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who lived right next door. Mr. Henderson, as far as I could remember, looked much older, maybe in his late 60s. He had a scraggly beard and always wore a baseball cap pulled low. I don't know why he slowly drove his car up to us and asked what we were up to that night. Sarah told him we were having a sleepover with a friend and might prank call some kids from school and stay up late watching scary movies. Mr. Henderson just chuckled and smiled at both of us, but even though I was just a 15-year-old girl, I didn't like the way he smiled at us. I didn't know this stranger, and I was surprised that Sarah shared so much with him. But maybe she knew him better. Mr. Henderson spoke in a raspy voice and said, "Hey, Sarah, I noticed your dad's car isn't in the driveway, so I guess he's working late again, right?" Sarah, being her usual friendly self and not realizing anything was off, replied, "Yep, he's doing the double shift tonight, so it's just us girls." Mr. Henderson gave that same weird smile and said, "All right, you girls have fun with your sleepover. And try not to get into too much trouble tonight." Then he slowly drove past us and parked his car in his own driveway. When we walked up the driveway to Sarah's house, we noticed that Mr. Henderson was still watching us as he went into his own home. Once we got inside, I asked Sarah about her neighbor because he gave me the creeps. Sarah agreed that he was a bit strange, but she didn't think he was dangerous. Sarah was the type who trusted people easily and was carefree, while I was more cautious and kind of a worrywart. So we made a pizza, gathered snacks, watched some movies, and chatted with our friends on AIM. Later, it was close to midnight, maybe even 1 a.m., but Sarah's dad still wasn't home. We were starting to drift off to sleep in our sleeping bags in the living room. The TV was on playing a scary movie in the background. All of a sudden, Sarah muted the TV and spoke quietly. She said she thought she saw the motion sensor light in their backyard go on and off. She then carefully got up to check out the window that looked over their backyard. I walked over quietly and asked if she saw anything. She didn't see anything at first, but after a while, we saw the light come on again. We tried our best to see outside, but it was tough. Sarah decided to go down to their basement to see if she could get a better look through one of the windows down there. We walked down to the basement stairs, being careful not to trip in the darkness. We didn't want to turn on the lights just in case someone or something outside could see us. It was strange to see Sarah taking things so seriously because she was usually the more relaxed friend. Maybe all those scary movies were making us both extra jumpy. In the basement, there was a big window next to a door on the far side. The motion sensor light flickered on and off again, and some light came through the window, letting us see a bit into the small basement. Suddenly, we heard the door that led to the backyard in the basement start to rattle. We both jumped and screamed. The window on the door had blinds covering it, so we couldn't see who was trying to open it, but we knew someone was trying to get in. Thankfully, the door was locked with a deadbolt, but we were still terrified. Sarah grabbed a baseball bat that was leaning against the wall and slowly moved closer to the door. I whispered to her that we should leave and maybe call her dad or the police, but Sarah carefully lifted a corner of the blinds on the door's window. The person on the other side was still trying to open the door. Sarah pulled up the blinds, and guess who we saw? It was Mr. Henderson, all right. But not the creepy Mr. Henderson we thought. He was standing there, panting, eyes wide with fear. "Girls, He stammered, "I just saw someone, in the shadows. I thought they were after you." Suddenly, everything clicked. The late-night walk, the weird smile, the flickering lights, it wasn't Mr. Henderson being scary, it was Mr. Henderson being scared. He was lonely, yes, but he was also a protector, a silent guardian of the street. He'd seen something in the dark, something that made his skin crawl, and he'd come to warn us, to scare us away from danger. Not to scare us with him. We looked at each other, then back at Mr. Henderson. His fear was real, his concern genuine. Sarah took a step forward, the baseball bat forgotten in her hand. "Mr. Henderson," she said softly, "we thought you were." He shook his head, his voice rough but kind. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." Two young girls alone. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, not with scary movies, but with mugs of hot cocoa and shared stories. Mr. Henderson told us about his childhood in the neighborhood, his days as a mechanic, his fear of the shadows that stretched long in the empty street. We told him about our school days, our silly dreams, our worries about growing up. He wasn't a monster, just a man with a kind heart and a lonely life. And maybe, just maybe, we weren't just two girls having a sleepover anymore. Maybe we were two girls making a friend, one who needed a little less fear and a little more light. The next morning, Sarah's dad came home, tired and relieved to find us safe and sound. We told him about Mr. Henderson, not with a scared whisper, but with a smile. He chuckled and shook his head, but his eyes held a warmth we hadn't seen before. Mr. Henderson became a regular visitor after that. He still kept his distance sometimes, a shadow in the corner, but he was no longer a scary one. He was a friend who liked scary movies, hot cocoa, and the sound of young voices chasing away the darkness. And that's how the sleepover with the creepy neighbor turned into something unexpected, something sweet. A reminder that sometimes, the scariest things are just shadows, and the best stories are the ones that end with a warm light and a friend by your side.